Masechet Megilah, Daf 23. We are dealing with the number of aliyot that we read on various days, and that includes 6 on Yom Kippur and 7 on Shabbat. And so we begin with that part of the Mishnah. We say, Matnitin Maneh, who is the author of our Mishnah? Lo Rabbi Ishmael, lo Rabbi Akiva. We have 2 schools, right? 2 of the great Tanaim in the 3rd generation. And it can't be either of them. Well, what did they say? Here we go. Ditanya, Braita. B'yom tov chamisha, b'yom kippurim shisha, u'b'shabbat shib'ah. So far, so good. This is exactly what we have in the Mishnah. Here's the problem. En pochatin mehen ve'en mosifin alehem divrei Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Ishmael says, you cannot have any less than that. That's true. That's the same as our Mishnah. But he says you cannot add any more. Our Mishnah says the opposite. Our Mishnah says, when you have 5, 6, or 7, you can add as many as you want. So therefore, our Mishnah cannot be Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Akiva omer b'yom tov chamisha. That's the same as what we have. B'yom kippurim shiva u'b'shabbat shisha. But this is switched, right? And our Mishnah says Yom Kippur is 6 aliyot, Shabbat is 7 aliyot. Here it's the opposite. En pochatin mehen aval mosifin alehem. According to Rabbi Akiva, you cannot have less, but you can have more. So that's good. That's the same as our Mishnah, but this is really curious. Why would Rabbi Akiva say that Yom Kippur has more than Shabbat? A couple of possibilities. Maybe because you can't eat on Yom Kippur, or because there's all kinds of special service in the Bet HaMikdash, all kinds of additional things that were done on Yom Kippur. So Yom Kippur is in that way more special than Shabbat. Whereas the other opinion says Shabbat is more special because of the punishment for doing melacha sikila as opposed to only karet. Okay, so now we have a problem. If the author is Rabbi Ishmael, we have a problem of adding more. The Braita says you cannot add more, and Mishnah says you can add more aliyot. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's 6 for Shabbat, 7 for Kippur, and our Mishnah says 6 for Kippur and 7 for Shabbat. So therefore, we have nobody that can be the author. Oh, it's a Braita from the school of Rabbi Ishmael, meaning a Tana, a professional reciter who is from in the school of Rabbi Ishmael. He taught this following Braita. The Tana de Rabbi Ishmael, B'yom tov hamisha, B'yom kippurim shisha, B'shabbat shib'ah. Good, that's the 5, 6, and 7 in the right order, like our Mishnah. En pochatin mehen, aval mosifin alehem, divrei Rabbi Ishmael. You can have less, but you can have more. And these are the words of Rabbi Ishmael. So this is perfect. This fits our Mishnah precisely. Okay, and he says it's the words of Rabbi Ishmael. So we have an author, Rabbi Ishmael. Okay, this brings up a new problem. Kasha Rabbi Ishmael. Well, which one is the really Rabbi Ishmael? Here he says one thing, and here he says you cannot add any more aliyot. So which one is it? There are 2 traditions. There are 2 schools of memorizers, and some remembered his teaching one way, and some the other way. Yeah, they're in contradiction, and we don't know which one Rabbi Ishmael really said, but at least one of them does accord with our Mishnah, and therefore, kind of surprising, the Mishnah in general follows the opinions of Rabbi Akiva most of the time. And you can see that from the fact that Rabbi Akiva is quoted more often than Rabbi Ishmael. Rabbi Akiva's students are quoted much, much more often than the students of Rabbi Ishmael in the next couple of generations. Nevertheless, from time to time, and here's one example, the Mishnah represents the opinion of Rabbi Ishmael, not Rabbi Akiva. Okay, good. Now that we know that, Mantana lehadetanya, who would be the author of this Baraita? B'yom tov me'acharin lavo me'maharin laset. On Yom Tov, people generally come late, meaning not that they come late to prayers, but the prayers start late. And they want them to end early. That's because on Yom Tov, since you're allowed to cook, so people are going to be involved in cooking, preparing their lunch before they go to Bet Knesset, and then they want to get home to eat. And in any case, the Yom Kippur prayer and Torah reading is short, so they come late and leave early. On Yom Kippur, since there's no eating and no cooking at all, and also the service is very long, so people are going to come early and they leave late. B'Shabbat maharin lavo, maharin laset. On Shabbat, they come early since you can't cook on Shabbat, so they're not preparing anything before, and they want to leave early because they want to go home and be able to eat the Shabbat meal. Okay, so who would be the author of this? Lema Rabbi Akiva. Maybe it must be Rabbi Akiva, since he's the one that says you can add aliyot. I know, even though the second version of Rabbi Ishmael said you can also add aliyot, but we weren't really sure if he actually said that or not. But Rabbi Akiva for sure says you can add aliyot, and so maybe he is the author of this, because it says on Yom Kippur they stay late. Maybe they stay late because you're adding many aliyot, like we do. We add a lot of aliyot, especially on Yom Kippur. No, afilu tema Rabbi Ishmael the nafesh shidura diyoma could even be Rabbi Ishmael, even the first version of Rabbi Ishmael that says you don't add aliyot. Nevertheless, on Yom Kippur is the only day that you stay late because there's a lot of prayers, right? You have to add the whole avodah and musaf and right, lots of things to do. And that's why it's longer. Sulichot. Okay, good. All right, so we resolved that. Now we go back to the general framework. Corresponding to what do we have? 3, 5, and 7 aliyot. Okay, we really answered this already. We said 3, and we gave different explanations why 3, like Kohanim, Levim, Yisraelim, and we said each one has in something extra. Rosh Chodesh is 4 because you have Musaf, and so on. So we really answered this question, but now we're going to add some more mnemonic devices, and this is going to treat only the odd ones, 3, 5, and 7. We're not going to talk about 4 at Rosh Chodesh at all. We're going to get to 6 of Yom Kippur. So we know it's a machloket about this 3, 5, and 7 between Rabbi Yitzchak and Bar Nachmani and the person that he was with. Who was he with? Umanu Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. That's one version of who has the machloket of the answer here. Others say it in the opposite way. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi and his chevruta. Who was that? Umanu Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani. It's the same people. Just do you remember who was the main person and who else was with him? And the third version of who said it? Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, not Rabbi Yitzchak, but Shmuel bar Nachmani. Okay, whoever said it. One opinion is like the number of words in each pasuk in Birkat Kohanim. The first one, Yibarecha Hashem v'yishmerecha, is 3 pasukim. The next one is 3 words. The next one is 5 words, and the last pasuk of Birkat Kohanim is 7 words. So there you go, 3, 5, 7. And so we can think of 3, 5, 7 when we think of these a regular day, Yom Tov, and Shabbat. All right, doesn't explain the ones in between and what's the connection, but I guess reading Torah is a blessing too. Others say that the 3 would be for the guards at the door. How do we know that there were 3 guards in the door of a palace? This is from the end of Sefer Melachim, when it says the Babylonians destroy the Bet HaMikdash, and they take away all the gold and silver and important things, and they take away into exile a whole bunch of important people. And Pasuk 18 says, Sheloshet Shomerei Hasaf, the 3 guards of the threshold. So now from there we know there are generally 3 guards, and there are 5 people who sometimes see the king's face. And we know that from the next pasuk where it says from Min Ha'ir lakach and so on and so forth, and Milchama Chamishan she meroeh penei hamelech, of those that meroeh. So it seems like if they sometimes see the face of the king. And then there's 7 roeh penei hamelech. That's not from here, but it could be from Esther. Megillat Esther has the 7 advisors of King Achashvarosh, right? The last one was Memuchan. And so there you go. The 7 people that are the closest to the king. And so therefore, kind of like each of the people that get an aliyah are in a way protecting, serving Hashem and confronting him. So on the lowest day, Chol, we just have 3. That's like the outer guards. And then on the day that's holier, like Yom Tov, we have 5. Those are people that are in between. And then 7 is the highest holiness. And those are the people that are in direct contact, the inner advisors of the king. And so we have 7 olim keneged those 7. It's curious to learn from a non-Jewish king who we hate and his terrible advisors. But I think the point is that we are learning what the general practice was from that source. Also curious to learn from the fact when they're exiled. But even though it's a negative story, it does show what the reality was in general. Okay, Taneh Rav Yosef, Shilosha Chamisha v'Shib'a, Shilosha Shomerei Hasaf, Chamisha Moreh Pnei HaMelech, Shib'a Ro'eh Pnei HaMelech. Rav Yosef just brings a baraita that says the same thing that we learned before from an Amorah, and says 3, 5, and 7 are the 3 different levels of those who serve a king. Amar le Abaye, Ad ha'idana ma'tamala paresh la'anmar. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, how come you never taught this to us before? How come only now? Why are you keeping secrets from us? This is good stuff. So Rav Yosef says, I didn't know that you needed to know it. I didn't know that you didn't know it. I figured maybe you learned it already. Did you ever ask me about it? And then I refuse to tell you? You have to ask me questions. Okay, this is a good lesson that you can't, as a student, you can't just wait till the teacher spoon feeds you. The students have to work and pull the information, make sure they got it straight, make sure they got everything from that their teacher has to offer. Amar le Yaakov mina'a le Rav Yehuda. Now, next question is, what about the 6th of Yom Kippur? What does that correspond to? We didn't answer that yet. When Ezra HaSofer came to Eretz Yisrael and he brought the Sefer Torah and presented it, read it to the people because they had forgotten it. So he made a big stage. This stage being like a recreation of Ma'amad Har Sinai. And he had 6 people with him, 6 on the right side and 6 on the left side. And so that's the answer. Yom Kippur, we have 6 people making 6 olim, like these 6 people that were helping him. And here's their names. We can count them. Matitya, Beshema, Anaya, Uriah, Vechilkiah, Umaaseya, Al Yamino. So that's 6 on his right. And on his left, Misemolo, Pedaya, Mishael, Umalkiah, Vehashum, Vehashbadana, Zechariah, Meshulam. Okay, if you counted with me, you'll see that there's 7. Okay, so what's the deal? There's 7 on his left side. Why'd you say 6? Hainu Zechariah, Hainu Meshulam, V'amaikada o Meshulam, Dimishlam be'o ba'deh. No, Zechariah is the same as Meshulam. If you notice, actually, there is no vav in between those 2. And so this is definitely a possible reading. And so why did they call Zechariah Meshulam? Because he was perfect in all his ways. He was shalem. He was a righteous person. And there you go. I have a son, Zechariah. He's 10 years old. He happened to be home today with the flu, and he studied Daf Yomi with me. And I didn't know this was going to come up. And so that was perfect. And so I hope this will apply to my son. Will also be a Sadiq like Mishlam. Tano Rabbanan, Hakol Olin Minyan Shib'a, Ba'afilu Katan, Ba'afilu Isha. Okay, very important. But it's also found in the Tosefta that anyone can get an aliyah. In those days, the person getting the aliyah would also generally read their own aliyah. So everyone is permitted, qualified, even a child and even a woman. Aval amiru chachamim isha lo tikra b'torah mipnei kevod sibur. However, even though that's the letter of the law, the sages then came and instituted that a woman should not read in the Torah because of the respect of the congregation. All right, what does that mean? Well, regarding a katan, there are different customs in different communities. I think most communities do not allow a child to get an aliyah, but the old custom in my community was a child who's becoming bar mitzvah, even before his bar mitzvah date, would read the Torah and even get an aliyah, and even children younger than that in a kids minyan they generally often read. And I know the old timers were very particular to allow it. even though I think some people are now becoming more stringent about it. Okay, regarding women, what does it mean? So at least one common explanation is that if a woman would go and read the Torah, people would say, oh, what's the matter with the men? None of them, the men are all ignoramuses. None of them, nobody knows how to read the Torah. And so it would be dishonorable to the men for a woman to read. According to that, you could ask a question, since it's dependent on the honor of the congregation. Let's say you make a new congregation, and that's founded on this assumption that women will be able to read from the Torah with mechitza and with whatever appropriate measures to ensure modesty. Would that be allowed? Because then that sibur is mochel al kevodo. Is that permissible or not? Is a huge machloket today, and I'm not going to answer it, but only mention that this is the main source regarding that controversy. Okay, question. Okay, we generally have 7 aliyot, and the last one's called mashlim, and then we have the person who reads the haftarah. So the maftir will read the last 3 pesukim and then read the haftarah. That's what we generally do today. So we actually have 8 people get an aliyah on Shabbat, and 1 extra, or one on Yom Tov it'll be 5 plus the maftir will be 6. But the question is, can the maftir also be mashlim? Right? What if you have 6 regular olim, and then the 7th one will read Shivi'i, and then also read the haftarah? Is that possible? One of these sages says yes, they can. One says no. The one who says yes, well, after all, he is reading the Torah. So if he's going up and reading the Torah, so why not include him in the 7? So he's also reading Navi, good. So he gets extra credit, but he certainly is reading Torah, so count him as 1. Mandamar eno ole kide ola damar ola mipne mamha maftir ben navi sadich shikra batorah techila mipne kibod Torah. The other one who says no is because of Ula. Ula asked, how come the maftir who's reading in Navi, we call him maftir because the maftir means to end, like he's the closer. He becomes is from the language of patur. After he finishes, everybody's patur because they finish their chiyuv. Like en maftirin achara pesach afikomin, right? Don't have after the pesach. You don't have dessert afterwards. Okay, so the one who finishes with the navi, so his main reason for getting up is to read the navi. Why do we make him read 3 pesukim, the end of the Torah also? It's because of the honor of the Torah, that he shouldn't get up and just pass by the Torah and only read Navi. It's not disrespectful to the Torah. It would be like, if someone comes, a dignitary comes to have a meeting with the vice president. Okay, but the president's there also. Okay, he should first greet the president, make some small talk with him, and only then he can have the main meeting why he came. If we went only to the vice president and didn't speak at all to the president, it would be disrespectful to the president. And so therefore, since he's only saying hello to the president, he's only reading a few pesukim of the Torah because of its honor, but that's not his main purpose. His main purpose why he was invited was for the haftarah, so therefore he doesn't count as one of the 7. Okay, good. So that's Ulaz. That would be the reason why we would not do it. Okay, challenge. Metibe. Hamaftir benavi lo yivchot me'asrim ve'ehad pesukin keneged shiv'a shekaru b'Torah. We're bringing as a question, but it's an important source by itself, that whenever we read a haftarah should never be less than 21 pesukim. Why 21? Corresponding to the minimum on the Shabbat of number of pesukim you could read in Torah, which would be 21. All of our parashiyot are more than 21, but technically, if you had needed to read less, or if you split up the Torah differently, like they once upon a time did, in Eretz Yisrael, they split it into 3.5 years, and so the minimum would be 21 because you have 7 aliyot, and each aliyah has at least 3, so you're going to have a minimum of 21 pesukim. And so until today, whenever we every haftarah should be at least 21 pesukim. Fine. That assumes that you're only reading 21, which means 7 aliyot. Vim ita, and if you need an eighth person, the maftir, who's going to read 3 more, then asrim v'arba'a havyan would be 28. And so therefore we can prove from this braita that the maftir can be one of the olim, one of the 7 olim, and you don't need an 8th person, right? Because if you need an 8th person, then it would be 24. So it's a challenge to what we generally do. The answer is no, since that person is only coming and reading the Torah because of the honor of the Torah, but his main purpose is coming to read the Haftarah, therefore he's not counted. He's not a real ole, and even if he reads 3 more Pesukim past the where Shivi'i ended, nevertheless, he's not counted as a necessary reading because he's only reading for respect. It's like it wasn't a real meeting with the president. We know he was only meeting with the vice president, and that was only small talk he was making with the president. Okay, by the way, you learn from here that the ending, the place where you end wasn't always the same, right? That you can, read 7, that the maftir could read farther, right? We never do that because we want mashlim to finish the parasha, say Kaddish. But you see from here that the custom back then might have been that the maftir would read 3 more pesukim beyond what Shivi'i had read. All right, good. So now we answered that challenge. Matkif la rava. V'hareh olotechem sefu delahavyan esrin v'chad v'karenan. Oh, now this is a challenge to that braita itself. You said every haftarah has to be at least 21 pesukim. However, the haftarah for Parashat Sav is from Yirmiyah chapter 7, which says, "Elotechem sefu al zibchechem v'chlu basar." Right, where Yirmiyah is saying, take your olah that you're supposed to burn up and add it to your other korbanot and eat it. Yirmiyah says you may as well eat it because you're doing the korbanot all wrong, your intention is all wrong, and therefore they're not holy. Okay, it's quite an amazing haftarah to read for Parashat Sav, where we have all the laws of korbanot. One of Yirmiyah's strongest statements against korbanot. Anyway, the point is that if you go and look how many pesukim there, you see that it's less than 21. We read there from 21 to 34, which is 14 pesukim plus another 3 from chapter 8. So that's 17 pesukim. Is generally the original haftarah. That 17 pesukim ends on a negative note. So the widespread custom is to add 2 more pesukim. But even according to that, it's only 19 pesukim, what we do today. And it's not 21. And yet we read it. So how could we read it? The answer is Shanahatam de Salik Inyana. That's because that after that 17 or 19 pesukim is the end of the topic. And so if you're ending a topic, you don't have to go and find another pasuk to add more for 21. The point is, if it's still in the middle of the topic, then do at least 21. But if you finish the topic, then it's okay. Similar to Torah, where we said the minimum is 10, but with Parashat Amalek, when we finish the topic after 9, so it's okay. You could read only 9 pesukim too. Hold on, is this true that if you didn't finish the topic, then you can't read less than 21? We have a challenge. Says many times, Rav Shmuel bar Abba says many times I was in front of Rabbi Yochanan, right? And I was reading, and he was the rabbi there, and he's the greatest sage of the generation. And then once I would read 10 pesukim of the Haftarah, he would say, stop, that's it. Just you read 10 pesukim, that's enough. This is an amazing thing because we know that the minimum for a weekday is 10. And so we had, 10 pesukim for Haftarah, and that's all you need. It doesn't say, we don't know if it was Shabbat or another day. Maybe it was a different day. Okay, anyway, we're assuming, let's say it was Shabbat. Makom sheyesh turgeman shaneh. And the answer is, when you have a translator, it's different because for every pasuk, even for Haftarah, one person would read the Hebrew, someone would read the Aramaic. So now you're doubling. So even 10 pesukim is actually 20 pesukim. Even though it's the same pasuk in translation, but you're reading 20 things, and you don't want to keep people that long to read 21 Pesukim, plus all the translation, that's going to be 42 Pesukim. So that's too long. So when you have a translator, 10 is sufficient. We only learned that Braita, you need 21 when there's no translator. But if you do have a translator, then say 10, and that's it. Now 10 plus 10 is still only 20, not 21. Oh, so most likely they repeated in Hebrew the last pasuk, just like we do today when we do read that section of Avraham Zaken Baba Yamim, and we read it in Aramaic, and the last pasuk we read in Hebrew, Aramaic, and then Hebrew again. That's the kind of conclusion to show that we finished. We read the Hebrew again, so it would still be 21 pesukim. All right, fascinating teachings that really relevant to all the way what we do in Bet Knesset nowadays, and that is the custom nowadays that we have 7 olim, and then we add one more separately. We do that on almost every day, and so that seems to be the halacha. Although on Tisha B'Av we have 3 aliyot. And the third one says the haftarah also. We don't send another one up for maftir. And you can't, because you only can have 3. You cannot add any more on that day. And so that shows that actually technically the maftir could be the last oleh can also say maftir. All right, next Mishnah, en porsin al shema. ואין מעוברין לפני התיבה, ואין נושאים את כפיהן, ואין קוראים בתורה, ואין מפטירין בנביא. All these things we're going to say you cannot do with less than 10 men. You need a minyan for all of these. So let's explain them one by one. The first one is the hardest. And porsin al shema. So pores is 2 explanations of this. Pores might mean to begin saying shema. In that case, this would refer to saying kaddish, barechu, and the first beracha of Yoser. And this would be in general if you have a minyan and you want to say Birkot Kiryat Shema, so you need a minyan in order to say the Kaddish, the Baruchu, and to the beginning, including the first beracha. Why particularly the first beracha? Because the first beracha has Kadosh, 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 has Kedusha in it. And right, Devarim should be Kedusha, we're going to see, right? It can only be done with a minyan there. So according to Yonim, this is talking about anybody, any day of the week. If you're praying biyachid, you cannot say the first beracha Yoser Or in full, because you can't say the Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh on your own. And therefore the Yonim have a very short version of Yoser Or that you would pray biyachid, that just says beginning of Yoser Or and ends Yoser Or and skips the whole Kedusha in the middle. So that's all one understanding of Pores al Shema. Just means to say the first beracha of Yoser Or. Another interpretation of it is Porsin means to split, to say half, to say a part of Shema. And this is talking about a case where you have 10 people who prayed already. But now there's one person who didn't pray yet, and he wants to be able to pray with the minyan. So, and you could see this in some Batei Knesset, you'll see people come in, they come in late at the end, and they'll say, does everybody mind if you wait another 5 minutes? And then let's say at the end of Shacharit, he will get up and he will say Kaddish, say Baruchu, and say the first beracha Yoser Or. And everybody else, even though they prayed already, they'll answer, they join in, and then that's considered as it is considered a minyan. So that you still get the benefit of being in the minyan. And so you start off in that way, and then he goes and says the rest of it. Okay, anyway, so en porsin al shema, either interpretation, you have to have 10 people in order to do this. This means to say amidah, to be a chazan for amidah, and say the chazarat Hashatz with the Naktishach and all that, only if there's 10. Nosin kapehen, say Birkat Kohanim, only with 10. And Korim Batorah, we don't take out a Torah and read it in public unless there are 10. And we don't read the Haftarah. Of course, you can just read it from a Tanakh on your own, but to say it with the Berachot is a public recitation, has to be also with 10, where the rabbis made the Navi just like the laws of reading the Torah. Ve'nosin ma'amad u'moshav. Okay, in those days when they had funerals, while they during the procession of taking the body to the grave site, they would pause every few steps. They walk a little while and then pause and sit. And then someone would deliver a eulogy, and then they would get up again and walk a little more and then sit. Nowadays, the Spanish Portuguese still have that. They don't still have that custom to pause. They walk a few steps, pause, and then keep going. They don't sit and make eulogies. But the point is that we're not eager to bury our loved one, so we're pausing, thinking about what's going on, reflecting on it, meditating, and then keep going. But this is an official ceremony, and you need 10 people in order to do this. The Gemara will explain why. We also, the beracha of Avelim, this is referring, and Tanchume Avelim. So this would be special recitations of blessings that one would say for the Avelim. For example, today, when we have the special Birkat Hamazon that we say with the mourners anytime that the Avelim are eating bread, and that we replace the fourth beracha of the Birkat Hamazon with a beracha that ends Baruch Atah Hashem Menachem Avelim. So that that would be an example of the Tanchume Avelim. Okay, Uberkat Chatanim, the Sheva Berachot that we say at a wedding, either under the chuppah or all 7 days at a meal. You have to have 10 people in order to say the Sheva Berachot, which is why you really technically need a minyan in order to have a wedding. This was a problem during COVID when people wanted to have a wedding with just 3 people, but it was very difficult because according to this, you do need a minyan. And to make a zimun and say Nevarech Elokenu Shechal Mishelo, you need 10. If someone donates land to the Bet HaMikdash, so then people have to come assess how much the land is worth, so that person will pay that amount. So the assessing has to be done by 10, and this has an additional requirement that one of the 10 has to be a Kohen. Since it's going to the Bet HaMikdash, the Kohen is there for representing the interests of the Bet HaMikdash, and also a person. If someone says, I donate my value to the Bet HaMikdash, so we have to come assess that person's value, and the assessors have to be 10 people, including a Kohen. All right, very interesting Mishnah. We ask, what is the source that you need 10? Amar Bichia bar Abba Amar Yochanan de Amar Kera v'niktashti betoch bnei Israel kol davar shebikdusha lo yeh pachot me'asara. Pasuk in Vayikra says, Hashem says, I will be kadosh only within the context of a congregation of bnei Israel. And so now we have to, that means anything that is considered holy, including saying Kiddusha and calling upon God's name, or blessing, or reading the Torah, all these things that include a special invocation of God's name are things that are done with holiness. And so Hashem's name is not respectful to call upon Hashem's name and create an atmosphere of holiness unless there is a congregation there within Bnei Israel. Now, this we still didn't prove that this is 10. So my mashma, where do you see 10 in this pasuk? The Tana de Bichia atya toch ketiv hacha v'niktashti betoch Bnei Israel uchtivata mibadelu mitoch ha'eda. Okay, one of a very curious Gezer Hashava. The word toch, right, within, appears not only in pasuk in Vayikra, but also regarding Korach and Adato. Moshe says everybody you should separate from this congregation. So you have the word mitoch coming in the context of a congregation, even though in that case it's an evil congregation of Korach who was about to be destroyed. Now, how do you know that? So now we have the connection between the word toch and Aida. But how many is Aida? How many people were with Korach? Well, we have the word Aida in yet another not positive context, which is regarding the spies. Now, there were 12 spies altogether, but 2 of them were good. Only 10 said negative things. So, la'eda hada'a hazot, all right, until when can I bear this evil congregation? And that was talking about the 10 negative spies. So malahlan asara, afkan asara. Therefore, just since Ida regarding spies means 10, so then we connect that back with the pasuk in Korach, and then there, Korach, the word Ida is connected with the word Toch. Within a congregation, and then that word toch goes back to betoch bnei Israel, and we learn that they are 10. Okay, there you go. It's a double gezer hashava, all from a negative context. So this seems strange. Why learn this from a negative context? Well, what you see here is that even though there were only 10, these spies were only 10 people, they had such an effect on the whole nation. And so you see how 10 people is enough to be a nucleus that can affect everybody else for negative. I think we could learn the opposite, the positive, from Sodom and Amorah when Abraham is arguing and say, what if there are 50 tzaddikim and it goes down to 10, and 10 is the last, he doesn't go to 9. Why? Perhaps the other way around. If there are 10 tzaddikim, and even in an evil place, those 10 tzaddikim can have positive influence over everyone else around them. So 10 is the minimum to be a core number, a congregation that can hold strong, and they can affect everyone else around them, and therefore that 10 can represent the whole rest of the nation. So that seems to be the idea behind this derasha. All right, now that we know that it's 10, let's explain that during a funeral service, the getting up and going down procession has to have 10. The leader of the procession would say, stand up, dear friends, beloved ones, and then when they would stop, they would say, Shivu yekarim shivu, sit down, beloved ones. So basim asara lav orach ar'a. So this honorific to talk, it would make sense if you have 10 or more people, right? Honored ones. But if you have less than, if you have 3 people, you're not going to make a big pronouncement. Honored ones, and there's only a few people there. So that's the reason why you need 10 for the procession. My birkat avelim. What are we referring to when we talk about birkat avelim? Birkat rehava, the beracha that we say in the street or in the square. In other words, this is immediately after the burial. The people that came to comfort the mourners would stand in rows, and the mourners would go one by one, and everybody would tell them some words of comfort, like we do today when we go and visit. We say mina shamayim tinuchamu, or whatever formula you say. So this is talking about an official formula that they would say back then, has to be done with 10. And when you do that, you have to be 10 people besides the avelim themselves. You don't count the avelim within the minyan, perhaps because the avelim are distracted. They're not thinking about joining in. They feel very separate and alone during that time. Also because the avelim respond in a way blessing the 10. So the 10 are separate from the avelim. So you need the 10 mourners besides the avelim. On the other hand, at a wedding, technically you only need 9 men present, because the groom himself can be, or chatanim, maybe have more than one groom getting married at the same time or celebrating at the same time. The chatanim can be included among the 10 because this is a joyous thing, and certainly they are joining in and happy, making the bride. He's making the bride happy, and he's joining in with the 10. We don't use God's name in a zimun less than 10 to say nevarech Elokenu. Since in order to say God's name with less than 10, it's not proper conduct. It's not respectful to invoke God's name when you only have a small amount of people. 10 represents the whole people, the whole congregation, and so then that's honorable. And lastly, how do we know that you need 10 people for assessing, and you need one kohen to be among them? If you look in Vayikra chapter 27, that has all the laws of assessment of property, you see the word kohanim appears 10 times. Why do we need it to? Why did it say it 10 times? So chad the gufe, one for itself to teach me that I need a kohen. Now, all the rest of them, we apply the principle, let's say the second one. For a second one, we apply the principle that if you have a limitation followed by another limitation, it's like a double negative. And a double negative is actually a positive. So if you say only a kohen once, I know only a kohen. If I say only a kohen the second time, then that's a double negative that tells me, even if it's not a kohen, it becomes an inclusive word. And then when you get to the third one, the odd number, that's again an exclusive word to say only a kohen. But the fourth one then flips it again, right? It's like logic gates. It keeps going back and forth. And so altogether, there are 10. And so that shows that the first one says it has to be a kohen. But then by the time you get to the 10th, all the rest from 2 to 9, from 2 to 10 are all inclusive, and so they can be anyone. And so that's the conclusion. One kohen, that's the first instance, and all 9, since we ended on an even number, that shows all the 9 additional ones can be Yisraelim. Hold on. Wait a second. This makes a lot of sense. There should be 5 and 5. Since all the even numbers are come to include even a non-Kohen, but the odd numbers are exclusive, saying only Kohen. So it should be 5 and 5. Kashya, good question. We don't have an answer to this. Okay. Ve'adam kayose bahen, Adam mi kadosh, and also a person. If you donate a person, wait, can a person become consecrated? Can I donate someone to the Bet HaMikdash and bring him here? I'm donating my friend, right? The Bet HaMikdash does not accept human gifts. Amar Rabbi Abu be'omer damai alai. No, person says my value I accept upon myself as a donation. Someone who gives his own worth, we take him and we assess how much would he be worth as a slave in the slave market. And so that's what he has in mind. I donate my worth, and he pays that amount. And we see that avadim are equated with land, as it says regarding avadim, that you will give them as an inheritance to your children, will take them as possession, like you do for land. And therefore, the laws of assessment regarding land and a person who donates himself are the same. You need 10 people, including 1 Kohen. Baruch Adonai L'olam. Amen ve'amen.